Hello and welcome to the Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. Each week, the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in finance take you beyond the numbers and hype, right to the heart of the big issues of the day. This week, we bring you the first of a special two-part exploration of the blue economy. In a few weeks' time, we'll be talking about a new white paper from UBS Global Wealth Management, which explores the ways in which the vital system of the global oceans can be supported, protected and sustained for the long term. In this first edition today, we're focusing on the work of some of the key contributors to that paper, as well as tackling some of the themes that will be up for discussion this very week at the United Nations Ocean Conference taking place in Nice. And we'll also hear some reflections following the recent Partnerships Forum run by the UBS Optimus Foundation at the bank's Wolfsburg Centre for Education and Dialogue. There, the foundation, which is very active in the field of the ocean economy, held a workshop that discussed these ideas with its partners. Here to dive into all of that, I'm delighted to say we're joined by David Obura, Director of Cordio East Africa, a Kenyan research organisation focused on coral reefs. David's also chair of IPBES, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Alongside him, we also welcome Patrick Nussbaumer, a Director for Climate and the Environment at the UBS Optimus Foundation. We spoke to them both ahead of the UNOC in Nice, where they'll be attending the main conference and various events on the margins. Patrick, David, welcome to you both. Patrick Nussbaumer, let me start with you. Let me ask about summing up for us the nature of the challenge that we're facing, first of all, in this context, because I think it's fairly well documented, but sometimes I guess people maybe oversimplify the nature of it, don't they? And just say, look, we just need to throw more capital at the problems. I guess one of the issues is somewhat more complex than that. Just give us your take, first of all, on the nature of the challenge and some of the frames of reference.
Thank you. I think what we realize is that nature and oceans and the blue economy are playing a key role in supporting the other parts of the economy. So I think there is not only an imperative that is related to protecting the environment, but there are also economic reasons to look after our oceans and our waters and to move away from extractive and destructive activities to those that are nature positive. And yes, there is a financing gap, so we need to find ways to have additional funding towards those activities. But from our perspective, it is not only about more funding, it is also better funding, and that is very important to make sure that we have the right funding and the right instruments to support those activities that are nature positive and helping us nurture that very precious natural capital that we have on the ocean.
And Patrick, let me just pick up on maybe some of the dialogue and the discourse out of the recent partnership conference, the UBS Wolfsburg Partnership Conference, and the role of collaboration in this space. As you've alluded to already there, such complexity and such urgency to the challenge. Collaboration is critical. Can you tell us a bit more about the mechanics that we need to structure and deliver on those collaborative partnerships?
Thanks for the question. So indeed, that workshop that we had in Wolfsburg was a fantastic opportunity to bring together a range of stakeholders that are active in the blue economy. So we were fortunate to have in the room practitioners, people influencing policies, people very close to local communities, people allocating capital, people developing pipeline of investment propositions in the blue economy. So we were fortunate to gather a fantastic group of stakeholders to think collectively about those challenges and, more importantly, to think about how we could resolve it. A lot of those initiatives and the things that need to happen so that we move towards a sustainable blue economy require those stakeholders to work together. It will not suffice to throw money at this. The market forces alone won't be able to take us where we want to be. They will help us, but we need to bring other stakeholders to be able to achieve the goals that we are all hoping for. So there is a need for a platform like the one we were fortunate to have in Wolfsburg for those stakeholders to come together to think about what works, what doesn't work, how we can join hands, how we can add to each other, how we can share knowledge and data, and then work towards those goals together. So we were fortunate to have this fantastic opportunity to bring those stakeholders, and this is very powerful, and our ambition is to continue that spirit of a community of practice going into the events that are happening in Monaco and Nice, and all the way to the other events towards the end of the year.
David Ibira, let me bring you in here. And a couple of the phrases that Patrick's mentioned there I think are really interesting, and talking about some of the kind of systems and some of the language we use. Talk to me about the value of assets in this space of the blue economy, blue nature. It's complicated, I suppose, because we don't even necessarily agree on what all the definitions are. But how do you think about the values of blue nature assets? Give us your headline thoughts on this.
Yes, so thanks. I mean, that is a critical question about values and what the assets are in thinking about nature in general, and in this context, the ocean itself. Now, one of the frameworks that IPBES has developed to a great degree is around values from nature. And what we've done is really identified three types of values. One is the one that we think about when we're thinking economics and most business activities, and that's instrumental values, or values that provide a direct benefit that we use in one way or another. Many of which we commoditize and are the basis of our economic and financial systems, such as food, timber, other commodities from nature, water even as well. But there are instrumental values that are very important, such as shade from trees, that we don't necessarily think of in financial terms, but of course have immense value when you look at where people sit on a sunny day, and the shade of a tree is much cooler than the shade of a canopy or something like that. But then in addition, there are other values. There are intrinsic values of nature. I think those are quite familiar to many people as well. Nature, it should exist for its own sake. But also importantly, one of the key things that we're thinking about more now, and this is complicated, is the relational values. That's the values we put in nature from more cultural perspectives, and are foundational to many cultures, and less so in some other cultures, perhaps. So when you think about the asset values and thinking about natural capital, the IPBES frameworks certainly seek to push for a very comprehensive valuation of natural assets, so that we don't only value nature for what we can extract, but for its sustenance into the future. But how do we think about the things that we can't value so easily in markets, and how do we ensure that those values are not undermined by activities in a business or economic sphere? And so these natural asset values are critically important, and recognizing that there's such a diversity that we need to be conscious of, and that we need to try and account for in our, developing and evolving economic and financial systems.
Well, Dave, just to pick up on that, because I think it's super interesting. When we talk about this, often there are skeptical voices, aren't there, that say, well, look, you can't, there isn't the same utility from monetizing nature, or you're using the very system that's got us into this problem. But I guess the point is, what you're saying is we can acknowledge that the market approach isn't optimized for that broader basket of values you've described. But that doesn't mean there's not a utility to still using those structures, right?
So we can use those structures, but we have to be very conscious of their limitations. And I think the key word that you used just now is optimized. And I think what has been done in the past is to use optimization from a maximization framework. For example, in fisheries, there was a conversation. Today, I'm at the Ocean Science Congress as a prelude to the UN Ocean Conference next week. So maximum sustainable yield. How do we take out the most fish we possibly can and sustain the stock into the future for economic purposes? So maybe the framework should be, we don't need to maximize the offtake, but perhaps we can optimize across a range of important values of that fish stock, of maintaining maybe more than that minimum stock that is sustainable into the future, because those fish are also important for maintaining the ecosystem, or because they have cultural values somewhere else, or some other reason. And then more broadly than that, I think the concept of balance is critical. So understanding there are so many values of nature, we can use our market systems if we try and balance across multiple values, rather than just optimizing one or minimum sets of values. And that's very complicated, to consider many different values like that. And so I think markets are struggling, and the, analysts are struggling to think about how that can happen. I think we have the tools in place. Our, computerized systems and AI are so powerful now, we can deal with what's needed computationally. We just have to shift our mindsets to be able to do that more comprehensively. And that's a big ask, but I think we do need to move in that direction.
I'm always reassured when talking to bright people like yourselves, though, that we're on the road, even if we've got a long way yet to travel. Patrick, let me bring you back in here because it's interesting. David mentioned balance in one context there, and there are so many balances to strike. And let me ask you a little bit about sustainability because it's become a bit of a watchword, isn't it, bandied around. But if we look at the various facets of sustainability in this space, any positive outcome that we're striving for, it can't be sustained without financial sustainability, right? And so if we talk about successful blue enterprises, for example, we have to acknowledge that those enterprises themselves need to also be sustainable as well as to be working in a environmentally sustainable way. How do you look at that? Is there a tension there? Is it healthy? Is that one of the big challenges that you and your colleagues are often talking about?
Thanks, indeed. So for us to be successful in creating the positive impact that we're looking for in the long term, it is wise for us to find ways to generate revenue so that we can go beyond concessional interventions, philanthropic intervention, donation, if you want. So if we can use the systems as they are, as imperfect as they might be, and then generate revenues to support the positive activity that we're looking for, then I think this is a winning ticket. And there are different ways to do that. One is you can find a way to monetize the impact. So, and we have this being done, more or less successfully when it comes to climate change mitigation with carbon credits. So the carbon credits, there is a market, more or less functioning, but there is a market, so you can monetize the impact. So that allows you to generate revenues to create that positive impact. Another way to do that is to support nature positive businesses. So those businesses that are creating the positive impact that you are looking for in the blue economy, for example, then you can find a way to finance them and support them to be effective and create that positive impact. Another way to do that is to support what we call adjacent businesses. So businesses that are not necessarily creating a positive environmental impact, but do not harm the environment, but strive because next to them there is nature. So you think about sustainable tourism, for example. People will go to those places because there is an amazing landscape or an amazing coastal area, and the excess revenue from those businesses you can use to have flow towards creating that positive impact. But I think the question is a very good one, and I want to quote one of the participants from our event in Wolfsburg when we were brainstorming about those issues, and he essentially said, you can't be green or you can't be blue, you can't be green, you can't be environmental if your business is in the red. So there is an element there to say that those businesses that we hope to create that positive impact, they need to be viable so that they can create that positive impact along the long term.
And David, it was interesting, obviously, Patrick mentioned carbon credits there. I know you've got lots of smart things to say on this. How viable do you think carbon credits, as one example, are to encourage this broader blue nature transition? How do you sort of gauge the viability of carbon credits as one example?
Oh, so I think the experience with carbon credits has shown that, just like with any market system, markets are based on trust. We trust the value of certain currencies, so markets transact in them. So carbon credits haven't evolved to that stage yet because of many different issues. Part of one is perhaps that the price isn't set or isn't right. It doesn't reflect the true nature of carbon. But I think part of the problem is, and this is very much, again, where the IPBES framings around the many different contributions from nature to people. Carbon sequestration is one benefit that nature provides. Food provisioning is another, water is another, and so on. And what has happened is that where carbon sequestration has been maximized to the detriment of other benefits from nature, so undermining food production for local markets or undermining water, no access to those areas for other benefits from biodiversity, those carbon credits have not had high integrity in the market system. So it's not been possible for everybody to trust that they really mean what they say they mean. And so those markets have gone through lots of fluctuations. There's been a lot of conflict around them. I think once we get to the point of carbon credits with the right price for carbon that reflects the value of taking carbon out of the atmosphere because of climate change, plus doing that in ways that add value to nature in local and regional contexts and add value to, say, a forest that helps trap water to provide water for downstream users, those carbon credits will have high integrity and they'll have very high capacity to bring in finance because it's a physical reality of the world that we live in, just as growing food is. So I think we can get there. We just need to really understand the full system. And this is part of the breadth of knowledge, I think, that is needed to come into the process of designing these markets and broadening these markets, rather than just using frameworks which we adopt from prior practices, many of which, as you said earlier on, delivered the problem in the first place. So we can't dig ourselves out of the problem using the same mindsets as got us there, but we can use some of those tools in much more deeply nuanced ways and that are tied to the realities of what nature provides and how we use it and impact in it. And so I think they have a lot of potential, but we're not quite there yet, but we're close with carbon credits. And so I really hope that we can get there as quickly as possible.
Well, again, you mentioned nuance there. And I guess if we look a little further ahead, one of the great challenges here is that there are long timelines to some of these things, but there are certainly some very nuanced conditions. And Patrick, if I bounce this back to you, what do we need to see from, the creators of these ecosystems, whether that's philanthropy, if we look at blended finance models, wherever it's coming from, what do we need to see in terms of supporting the development of these pipelines, which can generate investment in the here and now, but can also be reactive to these longer term timelines? How does this come together?
Thanks for the question. And I think this is a good segue for us to talk about Blue Streak paper that UBS is going to release. And this is precisely the kind of question that we are asking ourselves. What does it take to have this transition to a sustainable blue economy take place? And within that, what is the role of philanthropy? So in that paper, we're essentially extracting a lot from the experience that we have drawn from the discussion in the Wolfsburg Forum that we had. And one of the outcomes of that forum was precisely the need for us to come together and produce those thought leadership pieces to share the experience. So essentially 3 headlines coming out of that paper. First one is prove it. So a lot of those initiatives, those business models are innovative. They use new technology and they are largely unproven. The risk or the perceived risk around those is very high. So there is a role for philanthropy and concessional capital to seed those ideas, to support them at an early stage, to reduce the risk, and then nurture those until they grow and they are able to bring other capital. One example that we have there is Blue Alliance, which is looking after marine protected area, an idea that we have identified a while back that we seeded with grant funding, that we have been able to help with a more innovative financing instrument in the meantime, and that has later been able to put together a financing instrument that has other capital bringing to that. So the first element is proving, not demonstrate. Second is blend it. So a lot of those issues that we're dealing with are not commercially viable today. So there is a need to bring people that are able to deploy capital, a higher risk appetite or that are more patient. Now, if we're able to do that in a way that we can unlock other capital that is more commercially minded, then we're able to do bigger things, more ambitious with more capital. One example that we have there is a global fund for coral reef, protecting coral reef, as the name indicates, the ambition of raising 200 million to protect reef around the world with a blend of philanthropic capital, concessional capital, and more commercially minded capital. Third one is line them up. Really, there is a need for us to develop this pipeline of investment-ready opportunities. There are a lot of ideas out there, but they are not all, commercially viable now. So there is a need for us to support those, mature those so that they become investment ready, and then aggregate them, package them so that we can deploy bigger chunk of capital towards this. And an example that we have there is both on the side of the projects is Teratai, which is a business accelerator that is supporting business accessing finance. Another instrument that we have there is the SDG Impact Finance Initiative that does the same, but not with project, with financing instruments. So helping innovative finance instruments led by specialized fund managers develop and access like larger pool of capital to create that positive impact.
And David, just briefly, maybe a final thought from you. Again, if we look at the longer time horizon through your prism, what does that Blue Nature transition look like? I don't know, over a 5, over a 10, over a 15-year time horizon. Is it a question that we need to try and ensure that the true costs, the nature-related costs of doing any business are properly integrated into economic activities? Is that a sort of a pipe dream, or do you think we are moving in the right direction?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, first a comment on timelines. I mean, when I think of the long term, I would be thinking sort of 30 to 50 years. And the medium term might be the 10 to 15 years that you mentioned. But I think in terms of sort of the blue pipeline and getting to that sustainable business model that we seek in the blue economy and in other sectors now, it's absolutely essential that the full costs of doing business are internalized. I mean, I'm an ecologist, so when I see the concept of externalizing costs or reducing costs because those impacts sort of are pushed outside of the business planning model, in an ecological sense, nature remembers, the system remembers, and that cost just gets passed on to somebody else. And I think in a globalized planet now where there is no free space anymore, that just can't happen anymore. That's the nature of climate change. That's what climate change is showing us with carbon dioxide. We absolutely must work out how to internalize all these costs in the next 5 to 10 years. And that, again, that will be a challenge. There's no question about that. But with the broader valuation systems and a broader understanding of the full values of nature and market systems, I think we can internalize those costs, and business systems can adapt to that and be even more robust than they are now, because then they will really have long-term resilience baked into them.
David Obura, and before that, Patrick Nussbaumer. That brings us to the end of this edition of The Bulletin with UBS here on Monocle Radio. You can find out more about the ongoing UNOC via sdgs.un.org. If you head to ubs.com and search Optimus Foundation, or you can search for Blue Economy there for plenty more information, links and resources. Do look and listen out for the second part of our special exploration of the blue economy. We'll be publishing that in the coming weeks here on Monocle Radio. Or as ever, you can follow us and keep up to date via all good podcast platforms. This is The Bulletin with UBS on Monocle Radio. I'm Tom Edwards. Thanks for listening.